The distinct salinity of the air here hits you before your eyes even adjust to the blinding glare of the sun reflecting off the Gulf of Oman. It is a thick, humid blanket that clings to the dark, volcanic ophiolite rocks which form the jagged spine of the coastline, trapping the heat of the Arabian Peninsula against the sea. On a typical afternoon in July, temperatures soar past 45 degrees Celsius, creating a shimmering mirage above the asphalt that makes the distant container cranes look like they are melting into the horizon. This climate is relentless. Yet it was this very hostility, combined with a unique geological fortress, that created one of the most strategic maritime choke points in human history. We are standing in Muscat, Oman, a city that was effectively locked away from the world for centuries, hidden behind razor-sharp mountains and fortified walls that were sealed shut every night at dusk. To understand this place, you must ignore the manicured lawns of the diplomatic quarter and look instead at the scars etched into the stone cliffs that overlook the harbor. These are not natural formations. They are the remnants of watchtowers and firing positions carved by empires that fought to possess this hidden port, as the ancient Greek geographers once called it. Muscat is a fortress. For nearly 2 millennia, the geography of Muscat, Oman, dictated its destiny more than any king or sultan ever could. The city sits in a natural bowl, surrounded by the Hajar Mountains which drop precipitously into the deep waters of the harbor, creating a perfect storm-proof shelter for ships navigating the treacherous trade routes between India and the Mediterranean. While the rest of the region was often defined by the open desert, Muscat was defined by its enclosure. It was a trap. In 1507, the Portuguese Admiral Afonso de Albuquerque arrived with a fleet of warships, not to trade, but to dominate the spice routes that fed Europe's growing appetite for luxury. The Portuguese saw the jagged peaks not as scenery but as the foundations for an impenetrable defense system. They spent over a century constructing the twin sentinels that still loom over the old city today, Fort al-Jalali and Fort al-Marani. These were not merely castles, they were brutal machines of war, equipped with heavy cannons trained on the narrow harbor entrance to obliterate any wooden dhow that dared enter without permission. The engineering required to haul heavy artillery up these sheer cliffs in the sweltering 16th-century heat remains a logistical mystery. Thousands of laborers died here. Under Portuguese rule, the city became a claustrophobic garrison, a place of stone and iron where the local population was often pushed to the margins. But the earth remembers. In 1650, the Yoruba dynasty, led by Imam Sultan bin Saif, executed a daring siege that expelled the Portuguese, marking a pivotal moment where Oman became the first Arab state to drive out a European colonial power. They reclaimed the stone. However, the expulsion of the invaders did not immediately lead to the sprawling metropolis we see today. For centuries following the liberation, Muscat remained a tiny, walled enclave, physically cut off from the interior of Oman by the very mountains that protected it. As late as 1969, the city was a medieval relic living on the edge of the modern world. There were fewer than 10 kilometers of paved roads in the entire country. The city gates of Old Muscat were still locked at sundown, and anyone walking the streets after dark was required to carry a lantern by law. The isolation was total. Then came the explosion. In 1970, Sultan Qaboos bin Said ascended to the throne and initiated what is now known as the Renaissance, a period of hyper-accelerated modernization that rivals any industrial revolution in history. But unlike the vertical glass towers of Dubai or the sprawling grids of Riyadh, Muscat's transformation had to fight a war against geology. The mountains that protected the city were now strangling it. To expand, engineers had to perform invasive surgery on the landscape itself. Construction crews brought in heavy dynamite and earth-moving equipment to blast through the solid rock walls that separated the port of Muttra from the administrative center of Muscat. The Riam Pass, once a treacherous donkey track, was widened into a modern arterial road, connecting districts that had been isolated from each other for 1,000 years. This was not just road building, it was terraforming. As concrete mixers worked 24/7 creating new suburbs in the valleys of Rui and Qurum, the government enforced a strict aesthetic code that would define the city's visual identity. There would be no forest of steel skyscrapers here. Sultan Qaboos mandated that all buildings must adhere to traditional Arab-Islamic architectural motifs, and crucially, they must be white or sand-colored to reflect the brutal sun. This decision created a white city that appears to grow organically out of the dusty ground, rather than imposing itself upon it. The skyline is low. One of the most technically demanding projects of this era was the construction of the Sultan Qaboos Grand Mosque, a structure designed to test the limits of modern craftsmanship and engineering. Completed in 2001, the mosque sits on a site occupying 416,000 square meters, a massive footprint carved out of the expanding urban sprawl. The main dome rises 50 meters into the scorching air, constructed from a complex lattice of steel and clad in Indian sandstone that had to be precision cut to withstand the thermal expansion caused by the extreme temperature fluctuations of the desert. Inside the main prayer hall, engineers and artisans collaborated to install a chandelier that defies gravity. Manufactured by Swarovski, this 14-meter-tall luminaire weighs a staggering 8.5 metric tons. Suspending this crystal behemoth required a custom-engineered steel support frame integrated directly into the dome's structural skeleton, designed to hold the weight while appearing to float effortlessly above the worshippers. Below it lies a carpet that took 600 women 4 years to weave by hand, a single piece of textile covering over 4,000 square meters. It is perfection. These statistics, tons of steel, years of labor, millions of knots, are not just numbers. They are a declaration of capability from a nation that had no electricity grid just 3 decades prior. Yet the visible infrastructure of Muscat is only half the story. The city's survival depends on a hidden war waged against water. While the heat is a constant enemy, the true danger in Muscat is the flash flood. The city is built on a series of wadis, dry riverbeds that act as natural drainage channels for the mountains during the rare but violent storms. For most of the year, these wadis are dusty strips of land, often used as roads or parking lots. But when a cyclone hits like Ganu in 2007 or Shaheen in 2021, these channels transform into raging torrents of mud and debris within minutes, capable of sweeping away cars and concrete foundations. The engineering response has been a massive, largely invisible investment in hydrological defense. Underground pipes the width of subway tunnels run beneath the pristine boulevards, designed to divert millions of gallons of storm runoff into the sea. Deep beneath the bustling Mutra Corniche, where tourists watch cargo ships in the harbor, lies a complex network of pumps and sluice gates essential for preventing the historic Sauk from drowning. This battle is escalating. As climate change intensifies the Indian Ocean dipole, the storms are becoming more frequent and more ferocious. Muscat's urban planners are now using satellite topography and AI modeling to redesign the city's relationship with these wadis, turning them into linear parks that can safely flood without destroying the surrounding infrastructure. It is a high-stakes game of hydraulic engineering played against an unpredictable climate. Furthermore, the city's thirst is quenched by a marvel of chemical engineering, the desalination plants at Gubra and Barca. Muscat has no rivers. Every drop of water that flows from a tap in a luxury hotel or irrigates the vibrant flowers along the Sultan Qaboos highway has been violently torn from the sea, pushed through high-pressure reverse osmosis membranes, and remineralized for human consumption. The energy required to keep this city alive is immense. Amidst this struggle for survival, Muscat has cultivated a sophisticated cultural infrastructure that defies the region's stereotype of mere consumerism. The Royal Opera House Muscat, commissioned by the late Sultan and designed by the architectural firm WATG, is a fortress of acoustics disguised as a palace. Built with Omani desert rose stone, the structure features a modular interior where the stage and proscenium can physically move, reconfiguring the auditorium from an intimate concert hall to a grand operatic theater in a matter of hours. The sound engineering here is world-class. To ensure absolute silence from the outside world, the building is essentially a box within a box, isolated from the vibrations of the nearby highway and the hum of the city's air conditioning units by heavy rubber pads and acoustic gaps. It is a sanctuary of sound in a noisy world. Today, Muscat stands at another crossroads, looking toward a future that moves beyond the oil economy that funded its rapid rise. The new ruler, Sultan Haytham bin Tariq, has greenlit projects that push the boundaries of sustainable urbanism, most notably the upcoming Sultan Haytham City. This is not just a housing project. It is a 21st-century experiment in desert living. Covering nearly 15 million square meters, the master plan rejects the car-centric design of the 1980s in favor of walkable districts, shaded by architectural canopies designed to manipulate wind flow and reduce ambient temperatures naturally. Solar panels are everywhere. The goal is to house 100,000 residents in a city that generates a significant portion of its own energy and recycles its own water. The renderings show a futuristic architecture that still speaks the language of the past, arches, courtyards, and wind towers reimagined with carbon fiber and smart glass. But even with these advancements, the soul of Muscat remains at the water's edge. If you stand on the Mutra Corniche at dawn, you can still see the fishermen in their dhows heading out past the supertankers and the gray hulls of naval destroyers. The sea is constant. Muscat is a testament to the stubbornness of human settlement. It is a city that should not exist, squeezed between a furnace and an ocean, carved out of rock that radiates heat like a stove. Its transformation from a closed, medieval port to a modern capital is not just a story of oil wealth, it is a story of strategic geographical mastery. As the world becomes more volatile, this silent sentinel on the Strait of Hormuz watches the tides turn, proving that even the harshest landscapes can be tamed with enough concrete courage and vision. It endures.